Yeah, we might be somewhere by now. Oh, I feel that I should point this out. Just before I came out tonight to read the news, I called my personal psychic and was informed that there were some items had been included in tonight's stack which are extremely dangerous and highly irregular. And I did not have time to go through them, so I just felt it incumbent to warn you also. And now the news. One guy asked another, in what way has the body been a bad influence on the mind? And the second guy thought to himself, that's the damnedest question I believe I've ever heard. In what way has the body been a bad influence on the mind? And the guy who had asked it answered it. When the mind came along and saw how beautifully the body worked, totally mechanically and without any thought, it decided to imitate its operation. And the second guy pondered on this for a moment, then thought, well, hell, they both do function quite adequately in automatic mode. Then the first guy added, that's certainly true, if that's all you're after. And the second guy thought the question to himself, all you're after or all you're satisfied with? And the first guy nodded his silent agreement. Did I say dangerous and highly irregular? Another one of those conversation stories. One thing that keeps people from an expanded state of consciousness is them trying to describe it. But that can't be true. Yeah, maybe you're right. But what if it is true? Yeah, maybe you're right. At least it was short. The God of one world says that 100% of the prayers he receives from the local creatures are either about health or finances, one of which he can do something about and one of which is beyond his reach. But no one seems to realize this distinction. And even if they did, they wouldn't know which one was which. He says it's weird being a God. A kid ran into the kitchen and tugged at his mother's skirt, whining, Uncle Charlie just pointed out to me that you can't ever get toothpaste back in the tube once you squeezed it out. And his mama tried to shush him by noting, just be glad your father didn't tell you about how it is after you once hear about being more conscious than you are now. And after hearing herself say that, she joined the little one in braying, A strategic battle plan dialogue. One man used to fight thoughts, then took on words, then turned his attention back to thoughts, then back to words, and like that. Like what? That. That what? Like that, damn it. Compared to other parts, the body enjoys conflict in that there is always a clear-cut victor. Firing range tips. You can aim your mind like a pistol, you can aim it like a flamethrower, or like a swamp. It's all up to you, other than the fact that it's not, and they're all the same anyway. Pull! As part of his education, one father patted the TV set and said to his son, remember, boy, if the programming sucks, at least be sure the reception's good. And if you can't get good reception, only watch programs that at least you might potentially benefit from. Get my drift? And the lad nodded yes, assuming that the old man had patted the head of the TV as a metaphor for someone else's, and had purposefully omitted mentioning the further alternative of simply not watching the thing. Visitors and residents. To one To one's more stabilized consciousness, it's as though the mind is always out of town. It's alleged that on one planet, as punishment for some damn thing or the other, the local creatures were made quite aware of where their minds came from and where they could possibly go. Another history of the progress of man. He traded in rocks for words, then swapped words for metaphors, then traded metaphors in for scientific specificity, and on the fourth day attempted to rest. The parallel history of the few is that they struggle to somehow circle back in on and up ahead of themselves, never content for one thing to be representing another, when they're convinced that things could yet represent themselves, including themselves. It takes a blind man and his deaf brother on a porch to be able to take bustling gridlock, no matter how bustling, to be the sights and sounds of the Daytona 500. One man asked life's local conditions, "Can we agree on one thing?" And they replied, "Certainly, as long as it's my one thing." When the mind of the simple doesn't know what to call itself, it'll call itself God. And when the mind of the more sophisticated doesn't know what to call itself, it'll call itself thought. And the mind of the more conscious knows not to ever call itself, if it's going to call collect. Once upon a time, there was this group of people who kept getting a mystic drunk in hopes that while in this condition, he might slip up and tell them the secret. But foolish old people, didn't they realize that in such a condition he couldn't tell them? And by the way, even if this is just a made-up story and no group of people ever tried to do this to a mystic, think on this. Individual people, would-be mystics even, will get themselves drunk in the foolish belief that might help them discover the secret. Once upon a time, a boy asked his father, "What is the difference to a real mystic between a drug and a systematic discipline?" Definition from our sports desk. Thinking. The world's only game which can never stop, lest it not start up again. A gentleman from Copenhagen writes, "Does this strike anyone strange besides me, the fact that while thinking can drive you crazy, you can't go crazy unless you can think? Is it just me? Have I been in the cold too long or something?" The life of man's collective consciousness is like a gigantic balloon character in a parade. In fact, a balloon so large that it is the parade itself. And this humongous balloon is filled with nothing. That's right, absolutely nothing. And yet, dear friends, the damn thing rises up, flies, sails and survives, kept aloft by nothing more than you, the marchers and spectators, imagining that it is. A tale regarding the notion of enlightenment and the possibility of a tale regarding how the notion of enlightenment and the possibility of an expanded state of awareness first came about in a faraway land. When the thinking creatures first appeared, all were blind save one. And after the local forces in charge of things noticed the results this produced, they reversed the situation so that everyone could see, save this one man. And yet, curiously enough, nothing changed. The end. And I guess I should admit that I made up and put the title on this story. Does that help? One day, the center of the universe sent out a message to all the far-flung areas asking if everything was all right out there. Health watch. Without friction, the mind won't work, the eyes won't glaze, and the head won't spin, so watch it. When it comes to the collective consciousness of man, it's everyone's responsibility to help prop everyone else up. Those with a bit more animal spunk fear and hate the government rather than God. Even if what everyone else is talking about is a waste of time, if you think about how it is, then they slosh some of the slop on you. One man said, "Sometimes I get dizzier than at other times." And when asked when, replied, "Whenever I'm not here." While stopped at a service station in the desert to have his spare tire plugged, a man was told by the mechanic that sitting in a chair in the sun behind the building was a true-to-God mystic. So he wandered around the corner and found the man sitting there as promised and introduced himself. "Hi, my name's Theodore. I'm from Chicago. My friends call me TR. The mechanic over there says that you're a mystic. I used to read about that kind of thing and think about it. And I always wondered, doesn't learning the secret and purpose of existence spoil the rest of your life for you?" "Hi," he said, "my name's Theodore and I'm from Chicago." The most difficult thing about trying to think your way into a more comprehensive, elegant condition of consciousness is that you can't. When a curse falls upon a land, it falls on all of the land. And when a blessing falls upon a land, it falls likewise on all areas. Men invented geography to distract them from looking somewhere else. A boy mystic asked his father, the travel advisor, "Is it possible for those who do finally arrive at that wondrous Turkish city to eventually get bored with it?" No one ever stays long enough for that. Unless a man understands the purpose and position of the mind, he will believe that man is under the control of extra-personal forces, which is not to say is untrue, but he will take them to be supernatural rather than the most ordinary of things that they are. If you care what others think, you don't know how to think. A mystic who takes any credit deserves no credit. A passing slave ship pulled close enough to shore to call out to a man there and ask if he'd like to hop aboard. But he declined, saying, "That won't be necessary. I'm in a normal state of awareness." Arousing one morning from sleep to find his mind again already at work, busy with usual affairs, a man sighed and thought, "It's becoming too clear for me to ignore. Once a whore, forever a whore." If for no other reason, the difficulty in a man ever trying to find his way or to think his way out, because you cannot physically find your way out, is why so many people attempt to do it, such as undertake some physical discipline or to believe that if they physically remove themselves to a new area, that they would be a new person, perhaps even in a supernatural sense. But the difficulty, if no other, of a man trying to think his way out, trying to figure his way out of whatever seems to be the plague upon his psyche, that keeps him dissatisfied, that keeps him stupid, that keeps him confused, that keeps him disquieted. The trouble trying to think your way out is that if it is something that the mind is capable of ordinarily considering, it cannot. And there's a law to prove this, which I am not at liberty to reveal. There is a physical law, a very crude, very common, almost boring, damn near insulting law that will keep this from happening. Because if it is already a part of ordinary consciousness, it has a responsibility that people never, ever perceive correctly. It is not unknown, but it falls within a kind of vice, monkey grip, of criticism between the two opposing forces that keep everything held together. That what kinds of things men normally criticize, that one half of the team, and the game's going on, the civilized game known as collective consciousness. And there is a continuing. There is no schedule, but continuing, and they can overlap. You've got to be able to sense time in more than one reality. But one team takes a time out. It can be just momentarily, while the other team all goes boo, 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 makes rude signs, do all that. And then the other team, then the other time they pick it up, and then the other team goes, And they do all that. And they don't realize what they're missing. But they will now, because I'm going to tell you. And knowing you people, you'll go blabber it around. Which is, of course, highly dangerous. Well, one of the news items that got slipped in that point out that when it comes to collective consciousness, part of everyone's responsibility, and I did not add the modifier, part of everyone's unrecognized responsibility, is that everyone is helping prop up everyone else. That is, that everyone is helping prop up this structure, this balloon. See, there were several items tonight connected with it. I said at first collective consciousness was like this gigantic balloon in the parade, since I've been calling human existence moving right along a parade. But then the item went on to say, nah, it's too big for that. It is so big, in fact, the balloon is the parade. And then I point out that this balloon, as miraculous as it may sound, as huge as it is, that it takes up all of human consciousness, that the balloon is filled with nothing. Nothing. Well, it's filled with nothing other than those involved, which is everyone. It's filled with nothing other than humans imagining that it is filled with something. Now back to the other one that pointed out that when it comes to collective consciousness, the whole structure, for those who understand it, when I say civilization, you understand that I am by no means limiting it to the physical reality, to the buildings and the mortar and the bricks and the armaments of civilization. That's part of it, but that is the kindergarten tinker toys, building blocks. That is the simplest part. That's just almost an afterthought. That civilization itself does not exist without man having a collective consciousness, without man in certain areas, now almost this entire planet, but of man having gathered together and taken in toto, that you look in a particular area, and taken collectively, man, this country, this group, this division, as I said, in one sense, the planet itself, but at least in one local sense, that this group of people collectively are by and large run. They're run primarily by the mind as opposed to the body. That is, they are civilized, that they now will normally be reflected by having judicial structure. They will have a strong sense of morality, that people will do things individually that seem to be, that individually they will even say that they do not want to do, that is in conflict, that men will no longer attack their neighbor's wife, not because they're no longer got the hots for her, but they just now go, well, I don't know. I can't do it. My wife will leave me. Her brother-in-law is a good divorce lawyer. I'll be up the river. I can get arrested, all kinds of stuff. The point is they will now, as a whole, operate more by the dictates of the mind as opposed to the body. This is civilization. Everything else, as I said, is just bricks and paint and spit and polish and wheels and rubber and plastic. And a little silicone and sometimes some hot tar. And of course some fiberboard and some carpet. Well, but all of that is just to make it visible, and to give the simple something to do besides play with themselves. Civilization is the collective consciousness of man, and it is now, as I said, worldwide. It is now the nature of the planet that civilization, that is the collective consciousness, that is the mind of man, comparably speaking, is now of more importance than the body. Which, one more time, we've got to point out that all of this, taken linearly to the absurd, or one more step even, which is absurd level, is not true, because nothing is ever more important than the body, because if the body dies, we're all done for. Yes. But now back to the way things are operating here locally as perceived by three-dimensional consciousness. And that is that now the mind is of more importance. And if you don't like that, it's of more potential. We are now gaining more from the mind, that we have about reached the limits of physical reality or physical development. We can get no stronger, which is why we invented machines. You don't have to get stronger. You can now drive a forklift, and you can do that which even the Olympic weightlifting champ, forklift just picks up something and you can't do it. You can no longer do common multiplication as fast as a cheap computer. Machines have replaced that which is the physical norm, the mechanical norm of even the brain. That's why it's doing computers. But it seems to be the open end of the mind, only there, that now distinguishes man and holds any promise. That physically we're not getting any stronger, we're not getting any bigger, we're not getting... It just seems to have reached a certain point of leveling off. So the mind, that is civilization, is now more important than simply the survival level. But what is civilization and what cannot be recognized, and if it was even said, ordinary minds, as always, would take it as a critique rather than me pointing it out, which I'm not critiquing, but I'm pointing out something to you. Civilization is like a balloon filled with nothing. And that's not just some theory. The human nervous system can feel that, which is one reason people take it so seriously. I'll keep going. I'll put it to you another way. The bigger a thing is imaginary, the more it must be treated if it's important. The more it must be treated. It must be treated with increasing respect. Put it to you another way. This is invisible. This is impertinent to three-dimensional consciousness, but I'll put it to you this way. Everyone knows that civilization is a crock of shit. Perhaps that was too crude and direct. Everybody knows that civilization smells funny. Everybody understands that civilization is a very tricky, sticky, problematic, tenuous, fragile, damn near non-existent, barely hanging on affair. They do. Even the most civilized people. If anything, the more civilized are the people, the more they understand it, because the more civilized they are, the more they, which you end up, we're now speaking of the bulwarks of society, the upper middle class, the leaders of the world, they're the ones who most strongly support, promote, devote time, energy, money to the development of civilization. They're the ones that will promote the idea that we should increase education, that we should offer more social services, we should help those less civilized, bring them into the mainstream. They do not understand what they're doing, but they understand, as everybody does, as I'm telling you at one level, they understand that civilization is, to call it a thin veneer, is to exaggerate the matter just in a staggering degree. And everyone understands this. They know that it is just a thin, very thin something or other. Ordinary people would say morality, fear of justice, fear of retribution, all sorts of things. But they understand that this thing we call civilization, the whole thing, that it is everything wrapped in one. It's progress, it's technological evolution, it is creature comfort, it is ease of life, it is greater longevity, less fear of terminal illness, as I used to say at an unearly age, at a too early age. It is civilization itself. It is everything that you would say, that an ordinary mind would say, civilization is everything that man's unique talents have produced that no other animal can produce, regardless of what we may have internally, regardless if they've wanted to argue that no, man has some sort of cosmic spirit or some sort of godlike muse within him, or maybe it's just his mind, but there's something internally that distinguishes us from animals. They may admit that, but it means nothing. What means something to them is that which to them is the big part of civilization, that which seems to be the manifestations of whatever our unique ability is. All the things I was just mentioning. But they do know. They know that it must be protected. That is why the further up you go, relatively speaking, in the sophisticated, civilized chain, food chain in the parade of ordinary people, the further up you go, the more civilized are the people, the more they understand that this thing is shaky. Who fears the most the collapse of civilization? Now, this has been pointed out by people, as always, they get it wrong. They do not see it bluntly. To answer my own question, who fears most the possible collapse of civilization is those with the most to lose, the upper class. And an ordinary man can say, well, that's obvious. I mean, the poorer classes, the underbelly of societies, what do they care if civilization collapses? They just live in hand to mouth? They don't care. No. That may or may not be true, but that's not the point. They don't see it. It's too blunt. The more that they are, in a sense, reaping the fruits of this imaginary tree, the more they don't want anybody shaking this damn imaginary tree. They don't want people down that might turn out to be humanoid termites. That is, those who are not up there, balanced on the upper branches and sucking on the delicious imaginary fruit. They don't want people down there that might be hacking away at it and going, well, screw those people up there. And so the more that you are reaping the benefits of this imaginary parade and balloon of civilization, the more you want everyone to join in. And of course, when you're at the fringes, why I was pointing out, which is not really the point anymore, but everybody's got a piece of the fringe in them, and the fringe is still with us, is what I was pointing out, that the underbelly, speaking sociologically, which you understand from last time I wasn't speaking sociologically, but they could have called it that, it is the outcast or the fringe elements, those outside the mainstream of the parade, are the ones that say the main part of the parade. They oftentimes say the art, the literature. And by art, it's like the spiritual message that seems to be coming from them. Their encouragement to be more civilized. The underbelly, the fringe of the parade always says, well, what's coming from the heart of the parade, what's coming from the mainstream, is irrelevant. It has no relevance to my life. And that frightens the rest of the parade. It's, by the way, the fright is, as far as the whole parade, the fright is unwarranted. I mean, I can't prove that. It's not my job to prove it. If I could prove it, I wouldn't prove it to them, because sure enough, things would fall apart. Because they're supposed to say it's frightened. You should encourage it. If you find out that the bankers in your community and the mayor and everybody says civilization may be falling apart, or our local community is coming apart, and it's getting too dangerous for any of us to walk down the street or this and that, and we need to take action. If you happen to be walking by, holler, right on. Take that action, good people. Count on me, and then get the hell out, go on home, go about your business. But always encourage it, just because locally, as you know, spasmodically, it's like the same thing of certain areas of your body dying and aging faster than other parts. Locally on the planet, there are places that are dangerous, and there are places that fall apart. No big deal. Historians, political commentators, as always, being ordinary people, being the good ordinary people they are, they continue, by God, in the face of all ridicule, criticism, and being unappreciated, the ordinary of the world continually to rediscover the obvious. That is part of protecting society, and so we do have people pointing out, well, we have groups of citizens over here, or we have inter-community strife, or inter-nationalistic or cultural strife, and we have civilizations, at least erstwhile civilizations, falling apart, yes? And they do it like, well, this is just unthinkable. Well, if you don't know how to think, it is. If you have the mental retention, I guess, of like a cement block, after having just read history, or after having announced, yes, I'm Dr. So-and-so. Oh, well, I got an earache. No, I'm not that kind of doctor. I'm a doctor of history. Oh, and then he points out about how things are falling apart. And you go, wait a minute. You said you're a doctor of history. That means that you actually read some history books and studied and shit like that. And he goes, oh, yeah. Locally, just what I said is always, locally, are always groups of people exploding, dying, as an identifiable group. So that's not to say that does not happen. The parade is not dying. The whole thing is held together, but if you understand the whole thing in a quite real sense, not a critique, not in a sense of me criticizing it, which, let me point out again, but now some of you should find your own way to benefit from realizing this on your own, because you do it to yourself. It's not just me arguing with ordinary people, even theoretically, but when I say that if you point out the nature of life, people, ordinary minds, will either hear it as criticism or they won't hear it. They got no choice. It's not stupidity individually on their part. But if you tell somebody, let me point out to you the way government works. Let me point out to you the purpose of so-called sociology. Let me point out to you what civilization is about. They go, okay, yeah, I like shit like that. What is it? And you make some comment. If they hear it, if they find it of any interest, if it plucks at the wiring of their nervous system upstairs, their mind, they will find it to be a critique of some kind. They got no choice. They go, yeah. That's why I waste so much damn time saying this is not a criticism. I'm not picking on religion. I'm not doing this or that. I get sick of hearing it. But now, I guess one of the dangers, people that been listening to this, you just hear it now as me saying, and yeah, man, and it's just like part of the conversation. But you shouldn't do that, because you do it to yourself. As you try to notice something, and your mind will try to join in. If you try to look around and realize something afresh, something about you or something about the nature of life, and you think, I'll be damned. Something new that's almost wordless. It's almost a consciousness of some ordinary aspect of life, but in a way now freed from ordinary comment. If you do not watch it, your mind will immediately go, yeah, hey, and you think, yeah. And it has turned immediately into a form of criticism. And criticism, just a word, but the thing about criticism is you have now distracted, you have now blinded yourself from that which you may have had a partial glimpse of. Because as long as you're criticizing, you're not seeing whatever it is you're looking at. So, back to what I'm saying, what I'm going to point out is ordinary people could say, well, yeah, that's true. By God, tell them. No, it's not a by God, tell them. It's not a criticism. But civilization is compared to the body, compared to the survival instincts, compared to the existence and reality of man's physical life. Civilization, the world of the mind, is imaginary, comparably speaking. But it doesn't make any difference. I mean, what if that is absolutely true? What if that's the truest words ever spoken? And I said, everything that man has accomplished since he came from the swamp, or since he derived from an orangutan, since the mind started, everything he's derived since then, since we were out there brutish animals out there, not much better than the primates. Everything we've done since then is an illusion. It's just, well, it's an imaginary. I mean, it's there, but it's imaginary. We built the whole thing just on imagination. Now, what if that's true? So the hell what? What difference does it make? Except an ordinary mind, if they heard that, they'd go, yeah. And of course, they obviously, I mean, by saying yeah, it's obvious they're, as if we need it, they're admitting that they've got probably more than one severe criticisms of the way life operates in general. Thank you. Yeah. See, that was a sarcastic understatement. They probably have sundry, if I may be so bold. They probably have many, numerous, if not sundry, individual complaints with the way life operates. Thank you. Yeah. The thing is imaginary, and everybody's job is to help prop up everybody else. Now, I can explain this. I guess I will. I can drag out examples from anywhere and everywhere of how this operates. And again, it will sound, whatever I pick out, will sound like it's a criticism of some type person or some group of people or some institution, whereas it's not. But if you hear it that way, then you can't get any further. You keep thinking, well, the whole thing about being more conscious is a criticism of life. I keep saying, no, it's a criticism of limited awareness. And so you could say that there is room to say that, no, you couldn't. Yes, you could. I'm not back to playing those two parts. Now that goes with the news item. Okay. Do. It is everyone's responsibility to help prop up everyone else. And as I said, I was going to pull out an example, apparently again from the external world. But this is also what holds you internally, because the same thing that holds life together, the same thing that holds this imaginary parade together, not the physical parade, but the thing that holds civilization, the collective consciousness of man, what holds it together is the same thing that holds you together. So don't underestimate it. Even though I say it's not important, even though I say this is not a criticism of how things are out there, the only reason to keep looking at them is what you're going to look at. Because what's going on out there, what's holding that together, what holds that thing, what keeps that balloon that doesn't exist filled up, keeps it afloat, keeps it up there, keeps it healthy, is filled with nothing except people imagining that it's filled with something and held up there. And that's exactly what holds us together. Let's say. All right, I can think of two right out of today's news. Right out of today's news, here it is. January the 14th, 1952. And this was in, I believe it was the morning paper here in Oslo. But anyway, you people probably saw it. It was on the news. It was on the radio, those of you that have a wireless. It's coming in at least, well, some of you I know have short wave who live outside the metropolitan area, but it was coming in on Radio Free Argentina also, for those of you who can pick that up. There were two news items I can think of right now. I guess two is enough. One of them was since we're now in the midst of what's called the information age, already stepped through the threshold, and how important all of this is, and the media, which is a grand, we never needed one, but it's a grand sort of new emblem of collective consciousness. There was considered to be one of our leading Norwegian reporters, a serious reporter, recently did, I don't know had, but recently did a, quote, in-depth interview on the wireless with a famous entertainer, somewhat considered by most to be kind of frivolous, just an entertainer. A person, I can't remember, either sings or dances or she sings, and as most ordinary artists has an IQ probably higher than the aforementioned cinder block, but this serious reporter did an in-depth interview. And those of you that have ever heard an in-depth interview with almost anybody, but especially in sports and entertainment. But to my understanding, it was like an hour, and I'm sure it was good for the ratings because it's somebody's a popular figure. And this important figure, a reporter, spent the whole hour of the show interviewing this famous person. It was sports or entertainment, whoever it was. And according to the reports, there's already this thing's expanded since last night, or night before last, whenever it was on. That in the midst of it, the reporter had to start asking, or I keep saying had, I don't know who wrote the show, but began asking personal questions of the sports figure, the public figure, about his or her sex life. And supposedly what the report is that they prefaced and tried to excuse themselves, like, here I am, a serious reporter, but I feel obliged because I know, this is what people's always done since Herodotus. The reporter said, now I'm here on a serious assignment because you are an important figure, and I've been asking serious, important reporter-type questions, but I can hear right now, out in the Hitherlands and out in Finland and up further up close here in the wilds of Norway, I can hear people out there in the Hitherland sing by their radio saying, ask him about his sex life, because there have been so many rumors. So the reporter tried to protect himself. I'm an important reporter. That whole thing has already happened, like I said, in the last 48 hours. The papers are now full of immediate attacks. Worse than just my reporting of this, but immediate attacks of now poo-pooing this reporter about, well, you may have thought you're an important reporter, and I understand that the network or whatever the station was has got to keep the ratings up and got to stay in bit. We understand that. But for you, with what we assumed was a serious reputation, serious interest, for you to not only do what you did, but then they really began to, according to all the reports today, pointed out through their words back at the reporter, for you to sit there in the middle of the show, sitting there with this stumble bum, this painted up clown, this entertainer, this sports figure, they made fun. For you to sit there after all that and then say, well, of course, now I feel somewhat uncomfortable because me being a serious reporter, as you know I am, that I feel somewhat uncomfortable doing this, but I can hear other people ask, which they still do that. They'll be doing that. I bet you as far from now, I'm just going to guess. I'm not in the business prognosticating. I bet you as far ahead as 1995 or you wait and see. They'll still be doing this kind of thing. A reporter will go, well, now look, I appreciate your response to my question, but I can hear people out there in Radio Land, or I can hear people out there in the Hitherlands of Norway saying to themselves, So in other words, you're saying, now, I'm not saying this, but I can hear other people will be wanting to know this. And so I feel obliged to ask you, as embarrassing as it is, not only to you, but to me, being an important reporter. But I can hear them saying, what about all those rumors about his strange sex life? So now they stuck it to the reporter like, you blew any credibility. In other words, you had a position in this structure of civilization in our society. You were a somebody. You even stated it. You were even aware of the fact of your position, that you said, me as a serious reporter, and they just knew that I'm getting on ground, whereas my position, my imaginary spot within the molecular structure of this invisible stuff filling up this invisible balloon we call civilization or our local society, I'm about to put it in danger, and I can't help it. So I'm going to protect myself and point out that I'm not asking this. And I feel, in fact, somewhat chagrined, hesitant even, to ask this, but I can hear my vast audience. I can just hear them insisting, ask him about it. So I got to ask. Now, the next day, the reporters are saying, you blew it all, and so now this reporter is really getting skewed by the press, by his own fellow person, by other people outside. But within, of course, the next edition of the paper, you understand, when something gets going, there are now people taking up for the reporter and saying, yes, that would have been an uncomfortable position, but your fellow reporters or people in other media should not be attacking him for having to ask those kind of asinine and embarrassing questions, which are not serious reporter-type questions. But hey, we live in a capitalistic society. The station's got to stay on the air. They've got to pay for the program. That's what people want. Times are changing. There's going to be a guy in the 60s going to write a song with that name. Maybe I am psychic and don't know it. There are now people attacking the attackers of this reporter. You understand? And it's opening up debates, and I can also predict this. This is safe. I shouldn't call it a prediction, but I can assure you that within a matter of months, there will be in the Oslo University Journal of Journalism, that monthly publication, there will be serious committee, there will be panel discussions now upon where goeth today's media. There'll be important panel discussions on how much should a serious reporter bow to market pressures. There'll be important things because it has reached the point that it was easy last night or when it was on to laugh at this reporter, like, well, you've blown it. This is it. You'll never be able, forget your, attempted excuse and protection of saying, I don't do this, and this is what other people, whatever reputation you have as a serious journalist is gone. It cannot be retrieved. It is gone. Then people have picked that up and said that's not fair. And so now you have a whole structure within a structure about things are changing, that it's not the reporter's fault. Let me throw in another story, and then we'll see if we can put them all together. That's a figure of speech. I can put them all together. I'm just taking them apart temporarily by talking about them. You cannot separate Siamese. It's not twins. What's the word? I can't, for 6 billion people. But it's not twins and it's not triplets. Well, you know what I'm talking about. You cannot safely separate them. Not after birth, not before birth, not during birth, and not in a windstorm especially. I don't know whether to say this one. Well, I'll go ahead and do it. Maybe we won't get them all. There's also another item in the news today. It's a high-ranking member of our leading church here, our leading religion, that was just diagnosed as having what is usually a terminal disease. And he's been in and out of the hospital, and they just released it today, made it public that he is suffering from such and such, and the prognosis is not good, and et cetera. And so they interviewed him once he came out of the hospital. And he says, I understand the situation, and I appreciate the people's concern, and I'm doing the best I can. Now, this is the head of the religion of this particular country, the head man, or one of the head. And he says, but He looks them dead in the camera or in the microphone. We don't have cameras now. And he says, but now this is quite serious. And if you'd seen it, you wouldn't have laughed at the time if you'd been an ordinary person. And he says, but it can be hard to practice what you preach. Well, that's touching. Well, ordinary people, it's supposed to be touching until you think about it. He's the head of the religion, and it could have been something else, but religion is just the best always example to include everything from art to politics. There is the head, the leader, to the minds of all the people, the millions of people of this one country. It could have even been larger than that. But the people, the one man that they look to for guidance, the interpreter of God's will, the interpreter of right behavior, the interpreter of those kinds of actions, thoughts, that leads to a greater and greater expansion of civilization. Of course, religion calls it something else, but a more Christian or more religious life, a better life, even here on earth. And he says, well, yeah, but it's hard sometimes to practice what you preach. And they roll him away, and I'm sure some reporters and people, what a guy. Like, boy, until you think, what do you mean, what a guy? If you had some kind of cold-blooded, objective, non-personal to him, ability to think, you'd go, not what a guy, you think, what a goddamn guy. What a goddamn nervy, what an insubordinate, what an insulting guy. Think about it. For him to say, and we're still talking about the same thing, about everybody's in charge of propping everybody else up. For the man that everyone else has looked to for leadership, and him say, well, I got to tell you the truth, it's hard to practice what you preach. And of course, I'm being theatrically melodramatic. With ordinary people, it's not hard to practice what you preach. It's impossible. And so right away, the point is there is no proper basis for my sarcastic remark, even if it seemed that way. So that's a given. You got to remember that. It's impossible. Except ordinary people do not think that way. They think that it is possible. They think it's what we're aspiring to. And without question, they think the head of their church, whoever is the highest ranking emissary between them and the great one, God, if he hadn't said that, you do not normally think about, the mind cannot think about, it would begin to eat at the tree of civilization. It would begin to shake the foundations of the particular institution, in this case, the church. But here it is, the head guy says, well, it's hard to practice what you preach. Now, besides all my theatrics to try to get you to look and think a certain way, that is the nature of civilization. Now, you understand, we're not discounting me making that sarcastic remark and making you go, ha, ha, ha. That was the point, was to make you realize that it would be not ill-founded from a certain view to go, well, goddamn. And I don't know what else to say, but from one view you think, wait a minute. All my life, the church has meant so much to me. It's the times when things went wrong. Or when I'm around thinking, I wish I could do better. When I felt inspired at all, it was always on the basis of trying to do whatever the religion is. And here it is, the guy, the spokesman on earth for God in this religion, just because he's dying. I mean, it's not like it's something important. Just because he finds out he may be dying. He's 80 years old, he looks at us and goes, it's hard to practice what you preach. From one view, if civilization could expand collectively more, just instantly at one time, everybody's sitting there listening to him, especially the faithful. He wouldn't have to worry about when he's going to die. They would have leaped up and choked the son of a bitch to death. Like, well, goddamn, how dare you say that to me? That is one not untoward view. It doesn't happen. It's not supposed to be that way. But think about it one more time to get the point so I can shift it over. For the head guy, the spokesman for God, to tell you, he's saying it personal now. He's not talking in some theoretical way about the flock. He's talking personal because it's him dying. And he says, it's hard sometimes to practice what you preach. And you think, wait a minute. This guy has been in the church since he was 12 years old, worked his way up. He's been there at the head of this now for decades. I worship the man. I got his picture at home, and I think sometimes when I'm having problems dealing with my temper or something, I think, what would so-and-so do? Cardinal or Pope or whoever he is, so-and-so, what would he do? And it kind of inspired me. And there he sits, staring at me, looking at me dead in the eye and saying, it's hard to practice what you preach. At the conscious level, as ordinary people call it, it never crossed their mind. It is for them, but for him to say, what he's saying is, this whole thing's a crock of shit. Because if the head man says, sometimes it's hard to practice what you preach, it's because of a shift in circumstance. That is just because I find I'm dying, I got to tell you people the truth. You know, it's not as easy being, God's head man and being as smart and brilliant as I am, because he's not smart and brilliant. He ain't God man. He's part of a collective imaginary balloon, a structure in which everyone must prop everyone else up. And thus no one ever stands up and says, wait a minute, you mean just because you're dying that you're going to look me in the eye now, after all I've been through, after all you've meant for me, after all the church, this institution meant for me, you're going to tell me, well, sometimes it can be hard to practice what you preach. See, none of this can happen. But in you it happens, and you can see it. And if you see it, you got some chance of being relieved from running around and around and around and around and around and around and trying to think your way into some more elegant, some more comprehensive state of consciousness. And as long as you do that, you are playing every one of these same games in your own head. And games, I mean that in not the cocktail psychological sense. You are still supporting this same kind of imaginary structure. You are rolling yourself out of one area over here in your brain. You're rolling yourself out. You're this little old withered guy with a red coat or however he dresses. You're the head of your church. You're the head of your belief system. And today, you may not be physically dying, but you've got, as us mystics call it, kind of the spiritual red ass. Just kind of, and you just think, oh, life sucks. And you kind of roll yourself out and you think, well, wait a minute. I've been trying to walk this great mythical path for all these years. I can't be like this. I know better than this. And you kind of turn to your other part of your mind, and that part of your mind goes, well, yeah, but sometimes it can be hard to practice what you preach. And you go, well, that's true. You goddamn idiot. How can you call yourself that you're onto something when you can do that to you? Forget them out there. That's one thing, to let a little old man in a red coat or a green coat or somebody to pull the shuck on you. That's easy to comprehend. That's easy to pick on. That's easy to rail against. In fact, it's easy to get away from. But what kind of, I don't know, sort of more vigorous, more active idiot will do it to himself? You understand? Of course, that's backwards to everybody else, because everyone else, ordinary minds, as always, they get it turned the other way. Ordinary minds believe that institutions, civilized people, sane people, they believe that if in any way you're going to be misled, but for whatever reason, it's going to be your mind. That is, probably subconsciously, you'll be misled. But it's not going to be such sacred, such admirable institutions as the church. In other words, the church is not going to mislead you, or the government, whoever you take seriously, the family, your community. They're not going to mislead you. If anybody's going to mislead you, it's in here. I mean, you don't mean to, but it's going to be some quirk in you. It's going to be some subconscious motivation, some kind of childhood forgotten trauma, some repressed memory. You understand how they'll turn it backwards? They will never look out there and go, wait a minute, you people are pulling the shuck on me. They're not, but they can't even look there. I thought that would help right at the end, but shows what an idiot I am. Nothing helps at the end. That's not true. That's not true. But we don't get into sexual affairs. Is internally, you will play both of those games on you. You will do that reporter scenario. That you will think thoughts which amount to an interview. You'll think thoughts that, as far as you're concerned, is unworthy of you, a serious reporter. Do I have to make this? We're back to the original story, the first story, remember. That you are, being a serious reporter, and now you stand in the line and you look over, right above the chewing gum and the candy is this cheap newspaper that says, "The secret sex life of so-and-so finally revealed." You don't even have to read it. You don't have to buy it. It doesn't matter. The point is, you have engaged in that kind of thinking yourself that you think, I'm assuming you will, that you will then or some other time, it could be right then, that you think is unworthy of you. Like, I'm supposed to be a would-be. I'm trying to expand my consciousness, understand what life's going on. And here I am wondering, what so-and-so does in the bedroom, with 3 Boy Scouts and a jar of mayonnaise or whatever the hell it is. And you think, that's unworthy of me. And then you have to take up for you and go, well, damn, I'm just human, or they shouldn't have it there. Or you start all of this. And you're propping up an imaginary structure in you. You're propping up this imaginary structure of civilization, except in your case, you call it Fred or Mary or whoever you are. And you keep trying to say, well, sometimes I'm not so hot or sometimes I'm not all I should be. But, wait a minute, I meant well. It was the market pressures. I couldn't help it. They made me do it. Maybe I made me do it. As long as you do that is the point, you will prop the person up. You will prop up you. You will prop up your ordinary mental structure, and you'll keep thinking, well, at least I'm not falling apart, which to ordinary people is progress. Or another way, I pointed out before, how striking it is, or it should be when you see it, how getting sick, not terminally ill, but just sick. Or I pointed out to you, I proposed even at one time, why not only is the common cold, as it's called, so popular, so common, but cannot be cured, because it is a non-fatal malady of a duration that can be handled socially, that is not fatal, but can relieve you from temporarily certain social intercourse that keep you at home, and it can't be cured, and you get better finally, and you feel like, well, now I'm getting somewhere. That is the nature. That is a prime example. Once you begin to see it, that's just one. I could take other things. It's like somebody backs into your car and just, God, you feel horrible, and it takes you have to save up your money for a couple of weeks to get it fixed, and it gets fixed and put back like it was, and you feel so much better. You feel like, well, now we're getting somewhere. It's a kind of, shall we say, at least questionable sensation or appearance of progress. Except once you see that, then the rest of it fits also, that the whole structure is imaginary. And in your one lifetime, at the ordinary mental level, it's not going here nor there. And so one reason people enjoy sickness, as I was pointing out, non-fatal, is they can get better and think, well, by God, I'm getting somewhere. What do you mean getting somewhere? All you are is you're back where you were 2 weeks ago before you had the sore. Or your car is now fixed back up like it was before somebody backed into it. Oh, no, leave me alone. And it's true. Leave me alone. Because it's like, well, what are we going to do? Don't fool around with me. I don't fool around with anybody. Trouble is, you don't hardly fool around with yourself. Watch it. I see at the end of the tape they're making extremely rude gestures at me.